a classic horror movie, if it was instead called Shiny Time, would have overcome that kind of a title.
The horror was just being oily.
Oh.
If they said that the kid had shiny time instead of he's got the shine or the shining, yeah, I don't think it's that much of a stretch. I think Kubrick could have made that work.
Yeah. Well, I understand why Stephen King hated the movie.
My dad was at that screening. My dad was at the screening where Stephen King saw The Shining for the first time.
Details. What happened?
It was a book-related thing because my dad was in the book business, and so he met Stephen King a bunch of times. And they were even in a weird author band called The Rock Bottom Remainders. If you ever look that up, it's like Stephen King and Amy Tan and a bunch of other authors making bad covers of famous songs. But he was at the screening where Stephen King saw The Shining for the first time and has a firsthand account of how pissed he was about it.
Oh my God. What do you remember of that account?
I mean, I basically just gave it to you. My dad is a storyteller, so he would not be pleased if I did not do him justice with this recounting of the Stephen King interaction. But he also thought Stephen King was kind of a bitch. Now, that's me paraphrasing.
Sounds like he belongs on the show. Your dad.
He's ready. It's almost summer. He's ready. He's ready for his House of Strauss debut.
Yeah, he would know better than I would, but if memory serves, I think one of the things Kubrick does is he'll take the source material of a book and not necessarily care about it. He's more about the vibes. And I believe The Shining is more of this metaphor about alcoholism and its destructive nature. And I just don't think Kubrick cared at all about that. He liked the creepy vibes. He liked the hotel. And he made an incredibly memorable movie. But it's similar with The Clockwork Orange, where Clockwork Orange as a movie is just not, it doesn't necessarily care about the deep themes of A Clockwork Orange, the book. It's just not, it's not what he's in it for. He's in it for something else. So I can understand why Stephen A. King.
Stephen A. King. Now, quite frankly, Stanley.
I love Stanley Kubrick. I got nothing but respect for Stanley Kubrick. I'll tell anybody he's a great director. However,
I love the idea of King wearing Stephen A.'s wardrobe. First row to Red Sox game in like a pink, peak lapelled, double-breasted Laurel Piani.
I mean, I guess he would be a Red Sox fan since he's a Mainer. I didn't know that about Stephen King. It's hard for me to say Stephen without saying Stephen A. This is how this podcast has corrupted my mind. I cannot say Stephen without it becoming Stephen A. Guy. How you doing, by the way? Let's just start podcasting. We're all so busy, I suppose. Maybe, possibly. I don't know. It's the summertime. It's the last
holiday
day of school.
weekend.
It's the holiday weekend.
Maze is going, it's not a holiday weekend.
That was last weekend.
It's House of Strauss. We've got Guy Haberman here, broadcaster, 49ers YouTube man as well. Although some of my subscribers don't want 49ers stuff. If it happens, it will be buried at the end, and only for because Anthony Mays demands it, and he will throw a fit unless we get to the bottom of the Juwan Jennings contract and its implications. But the great thing about Guy is that he's a broadcaster. He's got opinions. He's got perspectives. And in this case, this is what I would call, Guy, a vocal victory lap. Last time you were on this podcast, you were recovering from your vocal cord surgery. We never knew if you'd be back. You sound scratchy. It sounded scratchy. But now, you sound like you. This is glorious. How are you doing?
I'm good. I wouldn't say I'm 100%. There's still moments where I start a sentence and it's not, the voice isn't totally there. But I could call a game today, which I couldn't do the last time I was on with you. And, I'm still doing my vocal exercises. They work, clearly. I got this thing that's supposed to, break, it's like, what's the thing you put in your room and, like helps you breathe when you're a little kid? It's not a nebulizer.
Humidifier?
It's humidifier?
Yeah, humidifier. This is like a mini humidifier, but it breaks the water into even smaller little vapors so that your vocal cords can absorb it. So that when you travel and, you're in a hotel room and you always get a dry, like a sore throat in a hotel room or whatever. So I'm going to travel with that this year. So hopefully that works. And, just keep my vocal, try to keep doing the things that I learned about voice placement and breathing, which the breathing part's actually hard. And I'm still struggling with that. I've become a very conscious breather, which is like the last thing you're supposed to be conscious about, but it's all for a good purpose. So, I'm not ready for a full victory lap, Ethan, but feel good. Thank you.
Well, what games might you be calling? Because you were calling a lot of Pac-12 games, and last I checked, that conference exists. Does it exist? It doesn't, but the teams do. What's going to happen?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year for them. They're going to be on the CW. I'm sure you've seen that as the TV news observer that you are. The CW broke into sports with Live Golf. Before that, a few people know this, but the CW has had like some version of the CW has had like an ACC football package in years past. Last year, you might have seen it. It would have looked like ESPN because they used the ESPN graphics package, but it wasn't ESPN. It was ACC. ACC for years was on something called, people in the East will know like what Raycom Sports is. And it was a big deal from what I understand. I don't remember it, but, for many years up until pretty kind of recently, they would carry ACC football on Raycom. And I think that package ended up on the CW last year. So anyway, Washington State and Oregon State will play those games. They are going to play some games on Fox, or FS1. Actually, I think Oregon State is hosting Purdue on Fox next year. So there's some of those games. The broadcast facility that they built that's a year old and is in San Ramon. So they used all of any Pac-12 event last year was broadcast out of the San Ramon facility that they built.
What?
Bishop Ranch. I don't know if for people in the East Bay may know where that is, but big business park.
If you're a big Tri-Valley guy, you get very excited listening to that.
It was downtown. The facility was downtown, just down from the Giants ballpark on 3rd Street up until last year. And, I know their hope is that they're going to be able to produce other events. This is not the question you asked me, but maybe somebody who's interested in media.
I was also distracted because I heard your voice lightly do the feint of the squeak of yore.
Yeah. Yep,
and I realized that I kind of liked it. Kind of like
it's still there.
Cindy Crawford having a mole, Padma Lakshmi having a scar. I kind of like that. It's sort of an accent on your overall.
I did listen to the podcast, my own podcast the other day, and I was like, is this better? Is it better this way? Should I not fully heal? But anyway, so we'll see what they do. I mean, their intention is to maybe be the back end kind of broadcaster for a variety, whoever needs to contract out a facility. And we'll see. I know there'd been some talk internally amongst those people of all the schools that left the Pac-12 for like the Big 12, right? The Big 12 or even the Big 10, they put a lot of their games on streaming. So if you looked at a lot of college football broadcast destinations were announced on Thursday, and they had, you'd look and you'd see like Utah week 1, ESPN Plus / Big 12 now. Well, I don't know exactly how the breakdown is going to go, but all of those institutions are going to have to they're going to have to broadcast about 100 games. So they're going to have to either build their own facility, hire their own people, or, farm that out to somebody else. Now, the question you asked me is what games am I going to be calling?
Yes.
This year. And, I haven't, we're in the process of finalizing that. So I'll tell you later.
You might have told me some things. It might have been improper for me to ask you on a public platform.
So the things I told you are true.
Okay, that's good.
When I heard you with Alexi Lawless say you didn't grow up playing sports, but when we went golfing, Maze, I'll have you know, Strauss can swing. I was shocked with the ferocity and accuracy that Ethan swings the driver. So he's very athletic, even if he didn't play sports.
Well, okay. So to be clear, I grew up playing sports. I said I didn't grow up playing professional sports, which was an awkward way to phrase it by me.
Okay.
I did play some sports. You want to give the professional athletes their respect. I feel sometimes they don't like it when you're trying to communicate and tell them things about playing sports. So I always try to be maybe too much. I always try to go, yeah, I know it's different. I know the way I played, high school basketball is different from the way da 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 da. And I just try to be really conscious about that because they might get their back up. You don't know. It was my first conversation with Alexi. I thought it went well, but you just want to make sure that you're not going to step on any toes.
I went up to Dustin Pedroia in the Red Sox dugout one time and said, Dustin, I got a hit off you in high school. And he said, I was a shitty pitcher.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny.
I thought it was a great comeback.
He could be prickly from what I've heard. In Nate Silver's book, trying to remember the title of the book, is massive bestseller. I feel terrible that I'm not just pulling it out of the air, but that's what happens sometimes. But he talks about the approaching of Pedroia as being an intimidating, difficult thing because he could be aloof. He's very finicky. He was very into preparation. He had to squeeze everything out of that particular frame, not the most athletic frame, and he did not want to be distracted by Guy strutting up to him and taunting him over what had happened years ago.
I found him to be very engaging and approachable. Even though I believe Silver's account, he was just, basketball is kind of like this. There's just guys just sitting around waiting for their turn. Like the other team is taking BP, so he's just sitting in the dugout. So yeah, I'm sure that's true. I'm sure Nate Silver's account is true, but I found him to be very engaging, and he made a good joke, but then was happy to talk more. Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes it just depends on the day. It depends on it depends on the mood. But I appreciate
just like all of us.
Yeah, I appreciate you telling the public that while I might be a nerd, I can do some things out there. I can make some things happen. I might have gotten a birdie out there. That was cool. Maybe this is the next phase for me. Maybe I become a golf guy.
Yep.
Maybe that's where it's going to be at for me. But where were we? I've got a docket. I've got topics. I've got things
because I'm not sure why I'm here today.
You always get like that. Why am I here? Why would anybody want to talk to me? I make content on YouTube all the time, giving my opinions, but I have no idea why anybody would.
I just don't want to be.
Anything.
I saw a clip of myself the other day. Somebody asked me about broadcast preparation, which I think you want to talk about, and I just saw it and I cringed because I was like, it felt so self-indulgent, and I don't want to. Anyway, go ahead, Ethan. It's your show.
You need to just. I think you need to just relax.
I'm relaxed.
I feel well. Okay, but here's what I'm saying. You need to let your guard down. Like relaxing's one thing, letting the guard down is the other thing. Because I think that you've got great opinions on sports broadcasting. You don't want to give all of them. You don't want to be talking shit about some colleague. I get it. I understand. But we want some of these opinions. We want some of these insights because you are of this order that is behind the scenes. And I do think you might feel uncomfortable about it, but I think anybody's job is interesting. And when Anthony Bourdain sent an article to the New Yorker in the late 90s about being a cook, he sent it in not thinking anything of it. But it turned out people were fascinated by that. And they were fascinated by it in part because they had a connection to having food made for them in a restaurant, but they didn't know anything about what went into it behind the scenes. And I think announcing is like that, where we see the product, but we don't know what goes into it. And when I saw that clip you mentioned about the way you prepare, I thought, one, this is interesting. And two, there are lessons from it. There are things that I could apply that I don't apply on as loosey-goosey a podcast as this one about preparing. I mean, here's something. What would happen if I just dropped you in to calling a football game between two well-known college football teams with no preparation? Could you fake your way through it?
Yes.
I was expecting no.
But, not as well. You know what I mean? Like there's 0 to 98%. And if you watch something where somebody is 50%, you can definitely tell the difference. And so, and then there's the 2% at the top where there's a big gap between 100% and 98 point. Now it's 98.5, 98.6, 98.7. All those little things matter. And so if that happened, I'd probably be able to do it at like 91%. But there's a big gap between 91% and the 98.5 that I'd be striving for. But I would get the two rosters and I'd be slow to identify every player, probably. If you said NFL, I'd be better because there's less players. There's no double numbers. They're more recognizable. Their uniforms, there's a 100% chance their uniforms are going to be readable. College, sometimes you get a weird, like a gray number on a white jersey. So the NFL would be even easier because there's just less people. The 85 that makes the tackle on special teams is the same 85 that also does play some receiver, in the NFL. So yeah, the first thing if you said you can have one thing, I would say just give me the rosters. And it wouldn't be the way I like, it wouldn't be organized the way I like them. It wouldn't have the pronunciation. I'd mispronounce some names, I haven't practiced, that sort of thing. But 3rd and 3 would be 3rd and 3.
But wouldn't you just have to do better than the viewer? You just have to know more than the viewer or project that you know more than the viewer. Because if I'm tuning into a random college game and I don't know the rosters, I'm not going to correct you in my head. I'm not going to be like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
There's two types of viewers though. And I would know less than the message board, than the fans that really know. Just like if I called a Niners game and you watched it and you didn't know it was me, but I called it with no preparation, I might be able to get away with still knowing more than you, Maze. But if you were a Texans fan and you dropped me in, I'd be fine. But you as a Texans fan would be like, well, you would know it. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference between the general fan and the hardcore fan. And you're trying to broadcast to both people.
Yeah, there are things like this. I feel if you dropped me into a pickup soccer game, I could be, I could kind of hide in a way. I could sort of not reveal the lack of value added. And I'm not saying the play-by-play, you've got to be more on it so you can't hide in soccer. This is actually a really bad analogy now that I think about it. Now that I actually am articulating my own thought, I think that it's not.
Well, the analogy might be if I dropped you into any NBA locker room, you could find an interesting story immediately. If I dropped you into a corporate office, you could probably also find an interesting story, but you might have again, we'd have to work this out. An environment where you don't quite know the lay of the land the same way. Yeah, a hockey locker room. Hey,
I think that
a meat packing plant. I challenge you, Ethan.
Well, then there's almost the hockey locker room would be ideal because it's this uncanny valley where it's similar enough to what I'm used to, but too foreign and I would be lost. But if you put me into something completely foreign, then I'm just the man from Mars and my observations might be interesting just because I've got no context. So I'll just notice things that stick out. So it's really hard to know. I do want to drill down on the thing that your clip about preparation, because I do think it is useful to people beyond that specific job, where you talked about doing a lot of preparation and then eventually recognizing that you weren't doing the kind of preparation that you actually needed in the heat of the moment when the adrenaline was hitting. So could you perhaps recapitulate that for us?
I think, the people who work in education would have a much better thorough answer than this. And, people say it all the time, like, oh man, I wish that they just taught basic finance in high school or, whatever the case is. But to me, one of the most useful skills to people would be at a young age, understanding how they learn. Somebody asked me the other day, are you a visual learner? I was like, I'm not sure. I guess sometimes maybe. I didn't really have an answer because I don't know how to put a label on how I've learned to learn. My wife is a dietitian and she likes to say when people say like, oh, should I eat this way or eat that way? She says, every body is different. And, I'm sure there are people that have ways that have studied how we can efficiently learn, but every person maybe takes it in a little differently. And for me, I had to figure out to what you're getting at is that the way I was preparing was I did everything I thought I was supposed to be doing, trying to capture every piece of information that existed. So if a game is on Saturday, starting the previous Sunday, I am just everything, every stat, every hometown, every parent's name, every story you can find, everything. And at the end of it, I'd feel very proud of be up till 3 a.m., 2 a.m., right? Just like, and at the end of it, I'd be like, look at this collection of beautifully organized, color coded information. And then the game would start and I had no system for like sifting it or understanding in a moment. Oh, there was that thing about Ethan. What was that thing? And I've got like 8 bullet points in size 6 font. And now I'm not paying attention. Right. So then what would happen is I just wouldn't use that stuff, which is fine. Like most stuff should end up on the cutting room floor anyway. But it took me a while to realize Jerry Seinfeld always has this joke that I think applies where he does this bit about how nighttime Jerry would really screw morning Jerry. Nighttime Jerry stays up till midnight and then morning Jerry pays the price. And for me, it was like, in the moment broadcasting version of myself needed the other version of myself that had 4 days, 5 days, 6 days to prepare to help that version when, quote unquote, the bullets are flying and I need to digest the information quickly. And so it meant 2 things for me. It meant really thinking about how this information was going to be used. How was I going to say it? What are the situations where I would use it? And then these are really fundamental things when you break it down. And then it meant reviewing it. So what I do now in what is a very unfinished and still evolving system is like I have my what's called my spotting board. It's big. It's big. I flip it. Both teams, offense at the top, defense at the bottom. I should have brought you one. Offense top, defense at the bottom. Then you flip it. It's the other offense and the other defense. And there's a lot going on it, but and then I will go through it, right? I will highlight. What really, as I'm sitting here now, right before the game, what really feels useful? What really feels right? What really should I use? What do I have to get in? You're just trying not to think as much. Yeah. And you just want to put yourself like anything, like anybody who trains for anything would tell you, you're just trying to put yourself in a position to react. So, it's really not that different than anything else, but it sounds stupid. It took me a while to figure that out for myself.
Yeah. Thinking is the enemy. And, a few weeks ago, it was funny. I think I went on the Simmons podcast the day before we went golfing. And that was a situation where I got the bat signal that I was going on about an hour or two before it happened. And it was on all this complex sports rights negotiation stuff, which I write about and I follow. So there's this backlog of info, but you also know that other people follow it in this granular way and you don't want to screw things up. And I called up a source of mine who follows all of that really well. And I said, hey, we need to have a talk. I'm about to do this podcast. Let's go over some things. And I had some things we wanted to go over. And we went over them. And then I did the podcast. And I called him up and I said, thank you so much. This was after it was already out and he had listened to the podcast. I said, thank you so much. You saved my ass. And he said, well, you're welcome, but you didn't use anything that I told you. And I said, I know, but I needed to go over those things to feel comfortable. I needed to go into that situation knowing that I had checked off those boxes, that I wouldn't wind up in a territory where I felt lost. If I had known that there was this territory out there that I could get lost in, that I'm on that podcast and I'm thinking about that, and that's impacting everything else. Being able to just go, okay, I covered this. If we go into that territory, I know what we're going to discuss. That was, I think, essential. So it's funny, you want to prepare in this way that's as comprehensive as the notes you used to have, but not necessarily have that all in front of you when you're doing the thing.
Yeah, I was just talking to a buddy about this yesterday. He had recently done something, a project with someone who's who has been in the spotlight half their lives and is very smart. And this guy that I was talking to is also very smart. And he said, it was crazy when it came time to get on camera and present this thing we're working on. I know it better than he does, but he was better at communicating it than me. Yeah. And it was frustrating. Like, it's bullshit. Like, kind of like they're boys, but he's like, it's kind of bullshit. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, did you practice? He's like, well, no. Mm-hmm. I said, well, this guy has been leading people and talking to people from the spotlight and communicating for half of his life. And I do think there's a lot of things in our lives that if you treated it like sports and you just practice it, not all the time, but a few times, you'd be better at it. So what I told him is the next time you do it, what you got to, not to get into the whole thing they're doing, but your own producer is going to ask you some questions that you need to answer to make this kind of highlight video to show people, hey, this is what our product does. I said, what those questions are going to be. So answer them, watch yourself. You will be your harshest. You will be your best critic. You'll know that I'm not saying what I'm trying to say. And then you just do it and do it and do it and do it. And it's not so that you then repeat the perfect answer. It's so that you yourself know the core of what you're trying to say so well that the only thing you say is your headline or I said, think of it either as like a newspaper headline or like an elevator pitch. I know if I practice something and it's 30 words, I can get it to 25 and then I can get it to 20 and then I can get it to 15. And the comparison I gave him is when you do the open in television, the first time you come on camera. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Along with Ethan, I'm Guy. Here's the game we have today. You'll know going in because of a conversation with your analyst and your producer, what you are we're going to do a little breakdown on the 49ers offense. Then we're going to go do a breakdown on the best defensive player on the other team, Anthony Mays, the key linebacker. We got to watch for him, blah, blah, blah. So what I do is I will write that out. Like I will write it out the way that if I could say it perfectly, and then I'll be changing it and scratching it and changing it and scratching it. And then this is like the morning of the game in the hotel. Then I'll practice it and practice it and practice it and practice it and practice it. And as you're doing it, you're like, oh, that word's not good, or that's a silly way of saying it or whatever. And then I can repeat it back without even looking at this little, my little index card. And then what's the best part is that I'm not actually repeating what I wrote down verbatim once I actually get on camera. I just know it's not about getting the words right. It's about really understanding exactly what is it that I need to communicate in how few words. Cause I got like 8 seconds. I don't want the guy standing there just looking at the camera next to me for 15 seconds. You get so aware of the difference between 4 seconds and 8 seconds, 12 seconds. And then it's just to what you said, Ethan. Now I am free because I know exactly. There is no doubt in my mind. If something goes wrong or something changes, the producer at the last second says, let's do this instead of that. Fine. Because it is so ingrained in my brain exactly what we want to say, what I want to say. Not how I'm going to say it, but just where I'm going. Where am I going? And, I think there's so many things like that. If you just practiced it a couple times, if you watched yourself say it and you went, oh, that is not what I'm trying to say, actually, or there's a better way to say it. But it feels weird. It feels weird to practice stuff that, you think, and I used to deal with this too. Like, oh, that guy just doesn't look like he tries. I'm going to try and do it that way. I'll add one more thing. I always thought it was cheating to do that, what I just described. I thought it was like a lesser art form if I didn't totally wing it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Costas doesn't use a notepad, and then somebody showed me, I saw a photo or maybe I watched it. I don't remember how I saw it, of Keith Jackson. Maybe I read it. Like Keith Jackson would write it down on a yellow notepad. And I thought, well, shit, if Keith Jackson can prepare, then maybe it's not cheating to actually think of what you're going to say ahead of time.
But it's a weird thing because you're not supposed to make it look like you've prepared it. You're supposed to make it look in a weird way like it's extemporaneous, and the viewer almost falls for it. The viewer, I think, is very much cut off from the sense that this is organized material for their brains. I'm watching passively, And I'm almost watching as though Al Michaels is simply conjuring up the graphic where we look at the offensive players talking about what college they went to, as though this is just, he's kind of just ambling through and, oh, and now for, now this, and now we see this. It's like, okay, Al wants me to see that. We're not really keyed into the structure of the performance. And I think we take a lot of those elements for granted. But if it was really loosey-goosey and nobody put any preparation into it, then it would be a complete mess.
Think of it like a basketball game. The Warriors are running. There is a structure to what they're doing, but it's not scripted out on play one. We're going to do this. On play two, we're going to do this. So like what you're describing, when Mike Tirico, now let's hear from the Colts offense. There is a show, an order that someone has written down how we want to do it. But if you only followed that order, if everybody was like, all right, remember first snap, we're going to get to the defense, then second snap, we're going to get to the offense, then third snap, we're going to get to the coaches. And then if you really followed it, it would be a mess because the real game starts and things happen, or we come on the air and it's live television. So by preparing, you're actually, it's counterintuitive. By preparing more, you're actually allowing yourself to be freer and to actually have a better flow. And so by having every Warrior player understanding all the plays and understanding where they're supposed to be when the other person does that and the other person does that, you don't create a more scripted team. You actually create a more free-flowing team.
Yeah.
So like Curb Your Enthusiasm, there's a very light script, but everyone knows what the point of every scene is. And I think that's the best way to, I think maybe it's not the best way, but I would compare it to that a little bit. As long as everyone knows what the purpose is, then each individual person can get there however they need to get there. So it's scripted, yes, but it's actually very, very unscripted in the end.
I'm stuck on the idea, this really intriguing idea of, I know this better, but he explained it better than I did. That's interesting to me. And I think a lot about the Bayless brothers, Rick and Skip Bayless. And you could say that there must be a genetic component that, for those who do not know, if you're listening to me right now, you've probably heard of Skip Bayless, the sports talk show arguer, takesman extraordinaire. Maybe you don't know that his brother is just as prominent and just as successful in his field. Rick Bayless, as a cook of Mexican cuisine who has done all sorts of TV programs and has a YouTube channel. Rick Bayless, highly successful. The two don't really have a relationship, apparently. They don't communicate at all. They just went on to lead these lives that were equally successful, but they attribute that success that both of them do to their mother giving them these speaking classes when they were kids. And it makes me wonder if this is some massive market inefficiency that it just doesn't occur to people to do, to take some sort of rhetoric class when somebody's really little. Because if you listen to Skip Bayless, there are no ums and uhs like there are on this podcast when I'm trying to come up with a word. Everything is properly, tersely communicated. And that ability to convey is almost a superpower, even if what's being conveyed in the case of Skip Bayless are a lot of sports opinions that I believe are just wrong. So there is just something to that where you could be a genius, you could be an expert on your field, but if you don't have the ability to convey it, then it just doesn't have that much utility to the listener, the viewer, or what have you.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, the difference between being a writer and a podcaster, Ethan, because I feel like those are two different parts of your brain, right? Like when you write an article, you don't approach it the same way you would if you were having a conversation or doing a podcast about it. And if you're a writer, if you're someone who's super prepared, like the guy that Guy was talking about, you're trying to force the conversation to hit the notes that you have, the research that you've done. You're trying to guide it there when you can't prepare for chaos. The bullets are flying. Yeah. It might not ever come up. You might, like you talked about with the prep you did for the Simmons podcast. You prepared and thought and put time and effort into considering a topic that never got broached. And you have to, as a podcaster, be willing to throw that out.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a writer, you need that paragraph. You need that to be seen.
There are things you should cut as a writer as well. Now I'm thinking how funny it would be if I just commanded Simmons to talk about the things. I prepared for something.
Actually,
to talk about that. Actually, no, thanks for asking. And this is a fun topic to get into. And unlike Guy, I won't be humble about the self-indulgence here. Everybody wants to hear about me and what I do. So
it's not about humility. It's just about understanding that, like, for me, there's so many people that know it at a high. I'm not the expert on this subject. I am an expert in a way.
It's like Charles Barkley's "God's the only expert," Kenny. He always says. Whenever Kenny Smith talks about the expert aspect.
I may be wrong, but I doubt it. As Chuck once said.
Is that a book that he wrote? Anyway, damn, I ummed. I was trying to, as an ode to Skip Bayless, I was trying to cut out the ums and the uhs. So the difference between writing and podcasting. First, I think I'm a better writer than I am a podcaster. It is very different. And it's almost as though if you were podcasting and after you said something, you could go, up, okay, another one, up, another one, up, another one. And it's got this quality to it, writing does, where it's a little bit like sculpture, where you've got this block and you're just sanding parts of it off and you're adding more and more detail. And the beginning of it is often not artistic at all, which I think is why people sometimes struggle with doing it, because they think they're engaged in this really artistic activity and the muse is not striking them, and so they feel lost, and they don't get that you need to start out very plainly conveying a thought or a few sentences that might just look terrible or inartful, and you just keep improving it. And so I think that's a lot of what the different quality is to it versus podcasting, where podcasting is, as you were saying, May, something you prepare for and then you perform, and it's like improv, and it's alive in that way, and you won't be perfect, and you have to live with not being perfect, and you have to live with later on going, oh God, I should have said that. That would have been the perfect comeback when Amin was giving me shit. I should have said that, but I didn't say it, and I just have to live with that. It's different. Writing, it's just more, you're going foot by foot. You're just going, it starts at, the weirdest quality of it is actually that it starts out as drudgery, and then the longer you're into the article, at least for me, the more fun it gets, because you feel like, okay, this is becoming a thing, and it generates its own momentum, like a ball rolling downhill, where the beginning is just so difficult. And podcasting's not like that. I feel as though once you set up the vibes at the beginning, it just goes the way it goes. But the strange thing about it is that after podcasting, I feel drained, but after writing, I feel energized. So that's strange. And I think that part of that is it's almost proportional to the difficulty. I think in a way, having a performed kind of fun is draining. And with writing, you're so excited to actually complete it after having gone through a bit of a painful process. You get a charge of adrenaline. And Dan Le Batard was saying that he didn't like writing, but he liked having written. To a degree, I like writing, but I certainly understand where he was going with that one. And I understand why he exchanged a writing career for a podcasting career.
Well, I remember when they started doing articles, click here and listen to this article. And I thought, why in the world would I ever do that? Why would I invite this audio when I'm just reading? But I listen to your written articles sometimes. And what I find interesting about them, you are hearing something in a way you never hear it, because we're used to hearing more sidebars, and you are writing this thing that in audio form is 7 minutes. But if you did a podcast on that topic, even if you were by yourself, it might be twice as long or maybe half as long. I don't know. But when it's written, it always feels like it's the exact right amount of time. So yeah, podcasting's easy in the sense that running is easy, but there's only doing it well and just doing it are two different things. Yeah. So how do you feel about the audio when you read an article you've written? What is that? It's not exactly podcasting, but it's not also writing, but it still is a performance. Like, do you ever read it and then go, oh, I wish I'd written it differently?
Yeah, that can happen. It's weird that it doesn't happen as much. I think I learned how to do it when I wrote my book, and they said, hey, we can hire somebody to narrate this, or we can pay you $2,000 to do it yourself. And I went, cool, $2,000. I'll try this. And it was a bit of a painful process to learn how to do it, but I'm so glad I went through it, just because it at least allows you to go, oh, I know how to do this. So many writers I've noticed, I think it's a mistake. I think it's such a mistake when a well-known writer with a platform who does podcasting has somebody else narrate their book. I've seen sports writers do it, sports writers I'm friends with. I hope they're not offended, but I think that's a massive mistake, because you have a built-in audience already. If you're podcasting, they know your voice. They want that voice there. Plus, you are already better at it than the writers out there. A lot of people write books and they're not podcasters. Sports writers tend to be podcasters. So you've got this built-in skill set that you're not using if you avoid doing it. And I think a lot of it is just that it feels weird and you don't have the assurance that you're good at it. And it seems difficult, but once you go through it, you go, oh, okay, that's not so bad. I'm just reading. It's not extraordinarily difficult. I certainly sometimes do. It's funny. I do sometimes think I should have done this or that, but there's this weird quality of writing. I remember Chuck Klosterman was saying on a podcast that he just doesn't think about any of the books he wrote at all. He doesn't. People come up to him and say this or that about him. Or that they like this or that, but he just doesn't think about it. And I related to that. I wrote a book and people will sometimes bring it up to me, but it was almost like I passed that kidney stone and it's done. And and it's weird because you should be so happy that somebody would take an interest in your work, and you're blessed to have that happen. But it's almost like while I'm reading it, Guy, at some part of me is going, that's the past. I'm already done. I'm already moving on. I'm reading it, but I'm not. If something could have been done to it or should have been done to it, somebody else is more of an expert on that than I am, because I'm already mentally checked out and on to the next thing.
I find writing intimidating and very permanent. And I think that's why it's intimidating.
Yeah, but isn't broadcasting these games more intimidating? I know I've spoken to people in your industry who fear the flub, who fear that accidentally in the moment they might have a Kuiper moment, for instance. You might say something and it comes off wrong, or you slur your words and it sounds like a slur, that sort of thing. And that's completely extemporaneous. I think that's far more intimidating than sitting down and having complete control of your instrument and knowing exactly what you're going to put out there. At least that's my perspective.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess in some ways writing feels like, to your point, you get to hone it until it's perfect. And if it's live television, you don't. And, you know, what I'm about to say doesn't really apply to the examples that you just gave, because those are, I think, extreme examples of extreme mistakes. Most mistakes that are terrifying to me are not ones that would get, no one would even think. You don't get fired for not nailing a touchdown, the call of a big play, or mispronouncing a name or whatever. But that's the stuff that terrifies me, is like you'll have this moment and you're not ready for, you know, you do it wrong, or you get somebody's name wrong, or you're whatever. And yes.
Well, it's ironic what I'm doing right now, because I'm talking about a moment of somebody interrupting somebody else screwing up a call, but it happens. So we're going with it. What you guys notice and react to as, oh my God, this was terrible, is different from what the fans sometimes take in. And I know another announcer who does play-by-play who sent me a text message after the Super Bowl. And sorry to bring this up, Niners fans, but the call of that Patrick Mahomes touchdown that wins the Super Bowl, my friend was saying Tony Romo completely messed this call up for, God, I'm drawing a blank on the
Jim Nance.
From Jim Nance. It is Jim Nance. In my head, it was Jim Nance. So I was thinking, was it Jim Nance? No, but he completely screwed Jim Nance with how he was talking over the call while it was happening, and he was doing his bubbly Tony Romo thing. And I think he did, and that did happen. But that's just something that I think the public's just too focused on losing $2,000 or making $2,000 over what just occurred right there to really key in on it. But it's always interesting to me what you guys notice and what you react to, and how there can be some overlap to what the fans notice, but sometimes not completely.
I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, the fan just wants to know, was I excited or not? Right. Did they match the excitement? Although, yeah, I mean, that's all they don't like. The fan isn't going like, boy, I hope Nance, this is a big opportunity for I hope he gets to nail this call. Like, who cares? Which is how, and I also think the more you do, I always have thought, and I don't know if this is true, and I've only talked to him once or twice. I don't know him. And I'd always love to ask Al Michaels. But one of my theories on Al is Al had the greatest call of his career, like at the very beginning of his career, right? The miracle.
You believe in miracles.
Do you believe miracles? And my theory was always kind of, and this is an older theory, as I've watched Al Michaels, I think it just might be Al. But if you can have one of the greatest calls early, then you're not chasing it. It totally freed. Like, did he get freed up of like feeling like I've got to nail this and nail this? No call he could make. Like that call is on the Mount Rushmore of calls. So he was never looking for his, I'm trying to get a job. It'd be great to to take this moment and get a good highlight out of it. And you can tell when people are broadcasting that way. But I always felt like the beauty of Al was he wasn't trying. This is my feeling. I didn't feel like he was trying to make any moment anything other than whatever it is. He didn't think, well, this is the Super Bowl. This will go on my career highlight tape here. I better nail this moment. He just called it however he wanted to call it, and that's really the best way to do it. If you can, to have that. For me, it was so freeing. It took me a long time to think of things you realize. It sounds like you're like not competing if you say, I'm not chasing perfection. Of course, I'd want to do a perfect broadcast. But for a long time, I started each broadcast by saying, maybe today is the day I do the perfect broadcast. And it's like stepping off on the first tee of a golf course and saying, today is the day that I hit a hole in one and shoot the lowest score of my life. And it's just not a productive way to actually be at your best, It
just occurred to me, that is a famous call, the do you believe in miracles? There aren't many famous calls. I think I've got it. Okay. I'm wondering what you think the best call of all time is for just one of those succinct sports moments. I have a selection. I think Joe Buck's, what was it? We'll see you later tonight. I think
see you tomorrow night, I think.
No, he said we'll see you tomorrow night. And that's good. That's good. Well, tomorrow night is good when something happens to extend the baseball series, when he said that.
I think that was an homage to his father as well. His father had made a call like that.
See, I didn't even know that. I'm talking about the one where the game went into the wee hours of the morning on the East Coast between the Yankees and the Red Sox, and it's we'll see you later tonight, because that conveys something about what just happened, and that this has gone on so long that we're now in the morning and the next game is actually happening tonight. To me, and I'm not even a big Joe Buck guy, to me, that's my favorite one if I have to choose one, because it's conveying this sort of little information. It's sort of a double information payload in one little sentence to communicate it. I think that one is the best if I have to choose one out of a pile.
It's hard for me to choose. I mean, I like this, just so you understand, this is a topic I could spend 7 hours on. Like, so you having one
Write an article, guy. Write an article.
See you later tonight.
And then narrate it.
It's, I think I talked to the Light Years guys yesterday, and they asked if there was an NBA broadcast team that I thought was the worst, and I said yes. And that's actually the wrong. I was thinking about afterwards, it's the wrong answer, because there really is
a shot at the Yes Network. Terrible. Oh my god, this is so specific.
But it's I think so many of these things, like if we want to rank stuff, we can rank stuff. But I think tiers is actually where a lot of rankings actually belong, is on tiers. Because I don't know how I could possibly come. I'll tell you the one that comes to mind, and it's very recent. Joe Davis's call of Bryce Harper's home run a couple years ago, and he called it the home run of his life or something like that. And if you go watch the tape, it is just the whole 60 seconds is just, I'm getting chills right now thinking about it. Go YouTube, Bryce Harper home run, Joe Davis or whatever. The whole thing is, it's textbook. It's so good. I think Buck, to your point, and this is where I get like, not uncomfortable. I enjoy talking about this stuff, but speaking publicly as if I'm the one that should be evaluating Joe Buck, is silly, but I enjoy it. But I recognize that it's stupid.
You could become one of those fringe quarterbacks who becomes the quarterback
I don't want to be that
on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't want to be. I know how hard it is, and I know how many mistakes I make, and I don't want to do that. Publicly, privately, all day long, me and my buddies. But we all get that, like, that person would watch our tape and be like, shut up. But I think Buck to me is an example of somebody who does a great job of simplification. And he's excellent. He does an excellent job at simplification. More words don't mean better call always, Yeah.
The critique with him is that he didn't sound excited enough when some of these moments hit, which I can get with that. It becomes a matter of taste. I didn't like a Pat Summerall. I know Pat Summerall is great, but it's not what I want. I want a dog, not a cat. I want somebody who's excited and excitable, and I get excited. I'm a very simple, stupid person when I watch sports that way. And having the audience put in their own excitement, and you're just the tableau. What am I saying? I don't know what word I'm trying to find here. The background, that is a style a lot of people like, but it's just, for me, I liked prime Gus Johnson. I liked going crazy. I'm into that.
Yeah. If you listen to young Joe Buck, you hear a lot of Pat Summerall. I think Joe has called some of the biggest games in sports for a quarter century plus, and he does a lot of, like, I know he just did an interview. I haven't listened to it yet, but I'm always interested to hear him talk, because he did not get to hone his craft in anonymity. If I listened to a tape from when I was 25, I'd be like, oh, you suck. Like, truly, you suck. Like, you should quit. At the time, I thought, I'm so fucking good, and so I think Joe has evolved, I think, in a very positive way. And I understand, I guess I understand that criticism. I don't feel that way about him, but I think I'd love to talk to him about it sometime. I've never met Joe, but I know people that know him well. When you call big games, you don't want to try to out-excite the crowd when the crowd's really excited. Like, the crowd, there's no I don't think there's any better instrument than a crowd.
Yeah.
How are you going to say anything that's better than a crowd losing its mind? And I don't know if that historically was part of his thinking or not, but if you put Joe Buck on a bunch of bad games, maybe you have to adjust a little, but he's got a crowd. And I think it's, I think in some ways you're taking your ego out. You have to try and take your ego. This is not about me getting my moment, right? What has to be said here? And maybe the moment's going to carry itself, which is what Al's, do you believe in miracles? Yes. I mean, if you listen to that call, he actually says it much faster than it gets repeated back. Do you believe in miracles? Yes. If you listen to it, he delivers it very quickly. There's not a long pause between miracles and yes. And he's not very it's not a self-indulgent call, but it's beautiful. It's
I feel like
it's good.
all those guys
Great.
have to pretend they came up with it on the fly, even though they didn't. That's my suspicion. I think
So-
all those broadcasters, if they're interviewed about it, go like, I don't know, man. The moment just took a hold of me. You know, it was miraculous, but they really went in with a little more intent. And they do the thing I do where sometimes I pretend that something I thought about is, oh, yeah. Oh, and that thing, I pretend it occurs to me, even though it didn't
You
really
actually
occur
do
to me.
that. Where you explain that you're doing it. You did it on the last podcast. There's 2 podcasts in a row you've done that.
Well, you know. I'm just
I
trying
did
to.
film study on Strauss.
Yep.
Well, that goes back to what I said about feeling like it's cheating if you prepare, because people would always say that, like, do you think of it? I get that question, Ethan, a lot, and that's the same deal. For a long time, I felt like I'm not going to write anything down. It's cheating. It's cheating, and I don't know how freestyle rappers do it. Maybe they have some phrases, whatever. But what I think is, for me, the moment that I felt like I nailed the best was a moment when about 3 minutes before, I'm like, something might happen here. And I just jotted down something on my little board there. Like, maybe I'll use that. And when I said it, I thought, no, too cheesy. You shouldn't have done that, dude. And I sped it up at the end to like finish it. And then when I heard it back, I was happy with it. So I don't know. Is it in the history of time? No one has said to you as a writer, like, that great passage you wrote, did you think about that in the moment that you wrote it? So, people get on Nance because they think he scripts big calls at the end. And my thing is just like, I don't know. You do have to prepare yourself for you try to prepare for all the things that could happen. So is it bad if you thought of, well, this moment might happen and then you're ready for it? I don't know the answer to that, but I have changed my perspective on it a little bit. I don't want to go in with like, here's the signature call because I'm trying to have a catchphrase. I don't, but is it bad? I'm truly asking, is it bad if you didn't just come up with it right then, but it actually works?
I do want you to have a catchphrase, and I think that the listeners should submit possible catchphrases. I think that would be fun for when there's a touchdown.
I'm intrigued, actually. And we do this all the time, right, buddies? I worked with a guy named Matt Muehlbach in college basketball who's fantastic, really excellent analyst. And he was college teammates with Steve Kerr at Arizona, and him and Kerr and Tom Tolbert and all those guys are tight. And when Steve was doing a game many years ago, I guess they have a buddy whose last name is Dubank. And the group text was like, hey, Steve, you got to work Dubank's name in. So Dwayne Wade, baseline, low line, bank shot. D Wade had that little baseline bank. And Steve said something along the lines of like, it's a difficult shot at that trajectory, but if you do bank it in, blah, blah, blah. So Matt came to me this a few years ago. Matt's like, Steve's going to be watching this game, and I want to try and do the same exact thing. If somebody banks in a shot, I want you to set me up. You say what Marv Albert said, and then I'm going to say, if you do bank it in. And I'm like, it's college basketball in 2019. Nobody banks in baseline jumpers, but fine. Yeah. Well, sure enough, somebody banks in a baseline jumper. And I said, whatever Marv's line was, I said to Matt. And Matt was so lost in the moment, he forgot to do the if you do bank it in line. So I say all that to say, like, yes, if you are watching a game, that person may be trying to work in somebody for just their group text, their buddies.
Well, let's shift it to color commentary. Bill Walton, the legendary Bill Walton, passed away. Bill Walton, that's my prompt for you, guy. Bill Walton, go.
Every single line he ever said was scripted.
There's actually a great conversation.
Santa.
There's a great conversation in that, which I'd like to get to because I'd love to talk about Bill. I've worked with Bill a couple of times and got to meet him several other times before that. And years ago, I listened to Bill. He did a podcast with David Axelrod.
Huh.
I said, yeah. And it's David, right?
The political strategist?
Yep. And I remember being on a plane, and I still have the notebook. I took copious notes because one of my career goals was to work with Bill. Like, all I want to do is work. I just want to work with Bill once to see if I can do it. And I got to work with him. And I was really grateful. I mean, he was everything I hoped he'd be and more. I didn't even know what I hoped, but he was wonderful. The way he treated everybody. And what I always say a few things to people. First of all, he cared so much. You know, I think people thought that he was there just to make it about him, and he wasn't at all. Before a basketball game on a Saturday night, you'd go to, both teams would practice at the gym on Friday. Then they would shoot around on Saturday. Most people, even me historically, I'll go to one of those things for each team. I won't go to both, you know. But last December, I was doing a BYU at Utah game, college, Huntsman Center, going to be 15,000 people with Walton. Bill was going to be there Friday both, Saturday both. So I was going to be there Friday both, Saturday both. And when Bill's there, he's just trying to get to know every single person. He talks to more people than anybody I work with. He wants to know the trainer's name. He wants to know the assistant trainer's name. He is interested in everybody, genuinely interested in everybody. And he is taking notes on these full blank. He has this clipboard. He had this clipboard. And on the clipboard was a photo of his late dog. And it said Cortez Walton. And it was this massive dog, beautiful dog. And he would take these notes on this clipboard on unlined paper in the most gorgeous handwriting you've ever seen. John Hancock signature, but in just long form. That's how he wrote. And he would talk to players, and players would always kind of stand off, even young guys who were born, 20 plus years after, long since Bill stopped playing, more than that. And he would get to know them and ask them about their parents. And all of this stuff is stuff that he would use. And he was really, really, really prepared to try and do a service to the people that were playing. And so he would go through those notes, and he'd have, this guy's from here, and then he came here, and then he learns, it's stuff you would not read anywhere. And then he would also freely, off the top of his head, like Eminem in 8 Mile, like a freestyle rapper, like I've never been in the presence of. It was just incredible. But I think people I made a little thing, just a quick little video, just my small little piece of the Bill Walton pie that I got. So many people got more of it. And somebody made a comment that said, like, Bill was selfish and was difficult for all of his partners to work with. You know, like, this person's perception was that it was about his ego. And I understand how maybe somebody would have that perception when you watch him on television, that he's making it about him. But then when I finally worked with him, I realized he wasn't making it about him at all. His whole thing was about celebrating everybody else. We would finish a broadcast, and Bill, he did this the last time I worked with him in December. He didn't move very well. He didn't walk very quickly. He would wait until every person who wanted a photo and an autograph got a photo and an autograph after the game. People would be lined up. Bill would be the last person to leave. And then he would take me to dinner. I mean, it's just, he was really, really, really about everybody else. And because he was the center of attention, I think people thought that he was making himself the center of attention. I was shocked that he was 71, even though I knew it, because he lived a life of way more than 71 years. And he was so sharp. I mean, so sharp. So I'm glad you brought Bill up, because I have a question that I've been talking to people about and I haven't been able to answer yet. And maybe you can help me, which is this. If you had a Mount Rushmore and Bill Walton was in the George Washington position on that Mount Rushmore, what Mount Rushmore category is that even? And who are the other 3 people there? And I haven't been able to answer that question.
Well, you could do it for color commentators in sports.
Sure. And then you adding a couple people who don't belong with Bill Walton.
Yeah, I guess he's in that top spot. It's analogous to how if we're doing a quarterback rankings, there's Patrick Mahomes, and then there's everybody else.
But also you could do it color commentators, and you'd be like, okay, but what about the fact that, like, the Grateful Dead viewed him as their greatest fan? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, how this person, it's not just, you could do color commentators, sure, but that's not actually capturing Bill Walton.
No, he transcends too much. He's a great American, but it feels weird to put him with Benjamin Franklin and other people I might put in the Great American bucket.
Right.
I could maybe go greatest baby boomers, and he could be in that range, but there's some stiff competition there.
Yeah,
Sports personality.
And are 19-year-old college kids lining up to meet all four of your greatest baby boomers? Maybe they are. Sport personality. Yeah, you could. I thought of sports personalities, and then I just put Charles Barkley on there, and then I didn't have anybody else.
Yeah, Chuck's on Bill's level.
I mean, I feel like Shaq is kind of close. Not similar in disposition, but in terms of being a remarkable person who like when you talk about, you said center a lot, and I think that's perfect because that was the position he played, right? But he was the center on the court, and he's the center because he's so tall and remarkable, but also he is considering like the rest of the world around him. And I think Shaq has done that. I don't think he's always doing that, but I think he has been that type of personality.
I just think Shaq's more famous, but there's something to the magnetism and the charisma of Walton and Barkley that's truly just once in a generation. And Shaq's funny. Shaq's a personality. His size makes him famous in addition to the accomplishments. But I just think there's just something about Walton and Barkley that seem almost... the truth is bigger than the myth, that there's just something to those guys where there's a truly special quality that they have that nobody else has. And I can't even think about, some of you listening might be aware of other sports and might be coming up with some people, and maybe there's some guys in football, but I can't come up with anybody who would be even in that range. It might be something that has to do with basketball, that it can produce this kind of freak flag fly independent streak personality that you're not going to get from the other sports.
Have you read Season of the Witch?
No.
By David Talbot. It's a great book about San Francisco, the history. And I'm reading this book, and there's Bill Walton. And not just Bill like interviewed, Bill connected to Bill's weaved into the Patty Hearst kidnapping. Like Bill's involved in that. Like his prime of like society's awareness of him starts as a college freshman at UCLA playing for John Wooden, and then doesn't end until he passes away.
He's a real life Forrest Gump.
Yeah. That's a boomer. I mean, he is this Zelig, would we say? He is is that what I'm looking for as a word? Let me see if that is what I'm looking for, if I've conjured that in this way. Anyway,
I guess, while you're looking it up, I'll say this. I'm just trying to find, and maybe this is the opposite of like what Joe Buck would do, is like, why are you complicating it? But because one of a kind just feels so cliche. But I don't think we'd come up with three more people for whatever Mount Rushmore. It doesn't mean it's the only Mount Rushmore. It just means whatever his is, there's not three more people.
I've never reverse engineered a Mount Rushmore until today. And I like this way of thinking about it. But yes, he's a larger than life personality. San Diego misses him. He's somebody I was aware of growing up. And I met him after, and this is again why I lied to Alexi Lawless, after I won the Hoop It Up tournament in San Diego, the 3-on-3 tournament at age 12. All me, all about me. No, we won it. There weren't too many teams in it. Who was on the call? Well, Bill Walton was there. Strauss to the house.
Well, let me bring the two topics together, unless you had somewhere else to go right there, Ethan.
Well, I just said that you got to meet Bill Walton. He gave the Hoop It Up trophy to you, and I was just in awe. I've never met somebody so large, and he was just, I can't even remember. I wish for the sake, because everybody's got such a great Bill Walton story. I wish I remembered what Bill Walton said to me when I was 12 years old, because he said a whole hell of a lot, but I was not taking any of it in. I was just staring up at him going, this is just surreal. Here's Bill Walton, and he's giving me this trophy, and he's like, it's sort of he's just smiling. He's saying good things. He's giving me life directions. It's a shame I didn't take anything in because I'm sure I would have had a more successful life had I. But he was just this big presence, even as a senior citizen with the back problems and everything else. He was bicycling around San Diego constantly. So people would see this giant figure on a bicycle all over town. And man, it's just, he will be missed. But you were going to say, Guy.
Well, you made me think. I wonder if he said to you, one thing he would always say to people is, thank you for my life, which I always thought was a beautiful way of, like, you just came into my life and now you're out of my life, but thank you for your contribution to my life. I was going to say, to tie both things together, the first time and I'd met him and I'd talked to him several times, but the first time I worked with him several years ago, I'd been told, I'm like, hey, just be ready for this. I show up at the shoot around. Hey, Bill, Guy Haberman. And he just waves and he says, save it for the air. And he pointed, he's like, he didn't want to talk at all. He wanted everything that we talked about on the air, authentic, not,
Wow.
Oh, we talked about this yesterday, a shoot around, you told me. So that meant that, on the air, he's asking me about things that I'm like, Bill, I was the first time I worked with him, it was very uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to be here talking about where I grew up, Bill. We're supposed to be calling this game. But it was the ultimate extreme of, we're not going to script anything. It's all going to be real. And, that was always, save it for the air. And he would just point, you go sit over there. I don't want to talk to you until we're on the air. And then about 30 seconds before we went on the air, he just said, I'd like to take you to dinner tonight if you're free. Yes, I would love that. Thank you, Bill. He drove. We went in through the back kitchen. They took us through the kitchen and they had a table ready for us.
Fellas.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool. But thank you for my life. That might have been what he said to you.
It's funny because when you meet a famous person, it's a moment usually you remember, and you remember all the details. But it was almost like his presence itself was so overstimulating and flooding to the senses that I could take nothing in. My perception was overloaded, and all I remember is his smiling face and him saying things and him giving me the trophy. I couldn't process anything else about it. I remember far more from meeting him later on and talking about the San Diego Public Library, which he's got a room in there. He donated a lot of money. It is the most beautiful building in San Diego. That library is. It's there's a rivalry between the library and Petco Park because Petco Park got built instead of the library, and then the library got built, and they're both near each other. And San Diego doesn't have many architectural marvels, but those two could lay. It's like how Duke is the Harvard of the South, It's no, they're actually both quite great. Petco has grown on me. Petco has undergone something strange where I didn't really think much of it in the beginning, but it has almost become a high-level ballpark. Whereas the San Diego Main Public Library is just a beautiful building, the kind of building that you usually don't see in San Diego. And that is in part a credit to Bill Walton, who gave a bunch of money to the building of it.
It helps to play big games in a stadium. It makes a stadium better when you play big games in it. But, sometimes I think I was thinking about this before we started, which is, people like to say, like, if you could invite 3 people to dinner, who would they be? And you come up with your list or whatever. But the follow-up, we never asked the follow-up question, which is, what the hell would you talk about with these? How would you get to anything of satisfaction to you if you got to talk to those 3 people? And, with Bill, it could be whatever. And he asked a lot of questions about a person. But to take it back to the first conversation we had, the thing I would ask, I'd want to know, if you told me, like, you get whoever, you get Gates, Magellan, whatever the list is,
Barkley,
is like, how do you think? How do you organize your thought? You're this person that has great thought. How do you I want to know, literally, like, show me your notebook. That would help people, right? If you could really see step 1 of how each person just begins to even think about something. And that's something we never really, you don't share, you don't see it. You see the finished product. You don't see the beginning, and watching Bill work was helpful.
a lot of people don't want to think about how they think. The machine might break. It might corrode at that point. Gets too
that's fine. You don't have to tell me. Just show me. Show me your notebook. I just want to know, like, is this crazy? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? Is this going to get me somewhere? Bill was prepared and totally free to freestyle it, and was capable. Not everyone can. When you say like, "Oh, I want to freestyle like Bill," okay, good luck. Go try.
Yeah. Well, you're revealing something, which is that he actually did the work. He had the basis. He had the foundation that you need. If he had not put that work in, then, and he's truly, because people go like, "Oh my God, wacky freestyles at 1 a.m. on the East Coast," and it won't work without the preparation and the baseline knowledge that he can draw off. The act would have worn thin had he not done that. Yes, I think that's a good thing to remember. But
also, Ethan, the part that I don't know is how is it that you could put up on the screen 7 different rock formations and he would have no notes and freestyle information about all of those 7 different rock formations?
Are you sure that he doesn't have notes from before? He might not have them in front of him, but
filed in his brain.
Yeah,
that's impressive.
Yeah,
one time he looked it up and now he can freestyle it.
But he did prepare at some point. It's not like he's or maybe he just Brock blind.
Yes, 100%, Anthony. But like it was also, it might not have been preparation. He might have just been able to read it and see a picture and remember it. Like his filing system was incredible.
That's the
it was always all available to maybe.
That's a credit to his.
It was always available to him. That was my experience.
It's a credit to his mother, who was a librarian.
That's right.
Worked with my mother.
Really?
Yeah.
What does she say about her?
I think she was nice. I didn't get many details. She'll probably listen to this podcast and she'll say that you should have said this or that. But yes, my mother was a librarian and his mother was a librarian. And my mom knew his mom. I don't know in what capacity. I might be exaggerating the level of it, but yeah, there was some. I think they worked together back in the day in some capacity in San Diego. I know this is what everybody tuned in for, to listen to details about the San Diego library system from decades ago. But
I would like to know how they prepared your mother and his mother, how they prepared. Bill had a very bad. He didn't learn to talk until he was in his mid to late 20s. He had a bad stutter. I mean, it's crazy. Like he's just the Forrest Gump thing is relevant.
So he's a great American. Well, right now I feel like Mays is just gonna.
Why have I been on this camera the whole time?
If we don't, he wants Niners answers. He wants Niners answers, guy. And if you don't want Niners answers and you're a listener, this is your opportunity to make a sandwich and or tap out of the whole thing. But Guy is here. He is on this Niners stuff. There are OTAs, which I'm still not totally sure what OTA stands for. Off-season training alligator. I don't know what it stands for.
Got all 3 words wrong.
Should have prepared.
I'm just so familiar with people saying OTAs that I never bothered to actually look up. Like, I know what it is without knowing what it is. But I'll start off and Mays can grill you with whatever, and I'll get out of here because I'm supposed to shoot some hoops with Nate Duncan. Juwan Jennings.
Wait, I have to stay and you get to leave?
No, that's not how it's working. We're all going to leave at once. We're all going to leave together. Don't worry.
Okay.
So Jennings, the Niners gave him a contract. He's a wide receiver. The 49ers appear to have something like 85 receivers on the roster. What the hell is happening?
Yeah. They've kind of invested in a role player, which you always wonder when a team is getting too expensive, where are they going to allocate? Where are they going to spend their money? He would have been the Super Bowl MVP if they'd won the Super Bowl, or he might have been, very well might have been. And he was a guy that I'd looked at for a few years and we're like, well, when it's over, he's going to be somewhere else. And I do think it's interesting that he's back now. It could just be the Niners do have a track record of just being good with making sure the right money's in the right place at the right time. And they could perhaps lower his cap number this year and sign Ayuk and front load that contract and then pay Purdy and backload that, whatever you're going to do. Maybe you're going to pay McCaffrey. So it may be that this is part of a couple more moves that we haven't seen yet, but fundamentally he is very much their type of guy. He's tough. He's physical. They don't have another, for a team that has a lot of little chess pieces, they don't have another one that is like him. So I do think it's interesting that he's back. He's kind of the guy that in basketball you may not get to keep if you have too many expensive stars, because he'd be way more expensive in basketball relative to his impact. But in football, the fact that he doesn't catch the ball a lot makes him cheaper. You know, Kendrick Bourne was a guy they lost, but he was on a worse Niners team and he caught more passes. If Juwan Jennings was on a worse Niners team, he'd probably be on another team making more money because he would have caught 45 or 50 balls last year instead of like 19.
Maze,
organized team activities, by the way.
Organized team activities. Got them all wrong. It's incredible. But
alligator, Maze. You weren't even trying, but okay.
No.
Maze.
I mean, I was being a little bit
you gave
silly.
Up.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing where when you're losing a video game and you start making goofy plays happen to show, I don't care about this. I didn't invest in this thing I failed at. But you were saying, Anthony.
Yeah, Jennings is the Dre Greenlaw of the offense. He's the guy who will start shit with the safety. If he didn't like the hit that he made on Ayuk or on Debo, Juwan is always the first guy in the scuffle, and you gotta love to have that guy around. If you're Ayuk, are you mad about this guy?
I don't think so. I don't think it prevents. You know, if you're Ayuk, you're like, okay. I mean, is there a world where me and Debo aren't on the team and Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall your top receivers? That doesn't seem like the Niners' MO. Like they love star players and they pay star players. So I don't think you're mad about it. It's not an amount of money that should prevent Brandon Ayuk from getting paid if the 49ers want to pay him.
I think you're mad if you're Ayuk, though. I think
because you just meant like that's the way athletes are. You just.
Well, not about that specifically, but just this oddness right here that we've discussed where it doesn't seem like anybody covets Ayuk. He's got the production of a highly coveted wide receiver. He's got the age of a highly coveted wide receiver. He's a first-round draft pick, and yet it doesn't seem... Nobody's fans right now are going, oh my God, if we could get Ayuk... If we could get Ayuk, whoo boy. And it seems as though the teams, it's the same thing where the Niners are going, anybody want Ayuk? First rounder, second rounder, anybody? And nobody really seems to want him, which is strange because, again, he's been highly productive. So I've related it back to this whole appropriating the game manager versus game changer conversation with quarterbacks, which I think is a silly conversation to have about quarterbacks that actually might be better to have about wide receivers. I think the perception is that you're not changing your game plan to account for Ayuk. You know, he's great. He does everything right, but you're not changing things like you would for Tyreek Hill or Jefferson. So I think he's mad because he's probably mystified as to why have I produced this on not too many opportunities, and yet it doesn't seem like anybody respects it. That's what I would think from the outside anyway.
I think that's a very natural way for him to look at it. He's in this weird spot of being the perfect player for the Niners, but also in the perfect position for himself. And so Kyle gets... Shanahan rightfully gets a lot of the credit, but I think this happens a lot with contracts. There's no real middle ground. If you're like a tier B guy, you just get paid like a tier A guy, and in the end, you get paid like a tier A guy, and all of this stuff is forgotten and in the past. There's not a world where Brandon Ayuk doesn't get paid like a tier A guy. It's just, is it going to happen this year? Is it going to happen next year? Is it going to happen with another team? Is it going to happen with this team? Now, easy for me to say, I'm not the guy who might, break a leg. Well, break a leg, you'd be back in 6 weeks, but, pop an Achilles before I've been paid. So it's an uncomfortable time, but this situation usually always ends the same way.
Does Brandon Ayuk's happiness have a tangible effect on the variety of potential outcomes for the 49ers season. If Brandon Ayuk is upset, is that going to be the razor's edge that stops this team from being elite yet again?
No, because if he's upset because he got paid, that'd be kind of crazy. I mean, he won't sign what he's not happy with.
Because he didn't get paid.
If he's upset because he didn't get paid, he's really incentivized to play well so that somebody wants to trade. Yeah. Like next year, someone will trade a first round pick for him and then he'll get paid.
From the NBA. In the NFL, it's different. They actually perform. In the NBA, it would just be, well, we got to trade him to the exact team he wants to be on. What other choice do we have in this situation?
You're just in the NFL, you're stuck. You gotta if you do not perform, you are stuck. So, the Niners have walked a fine that locker room, they have constantly kind of been in spots, right, where you're like, is this the thing? Is this going to tear them apart? Yeah. And then the answer is no, it hasn't. No. It doesn't. McCaffrey hasn't. Is that going to be a thing? Jimmy, is that Trey? Nothing affects them. It's crazy.
I have a theory on that. On that from the outside. You're in it. You go to these things. OTAs, whatever it stands for. I think my theory is just I hear so much. Was it Logan Ryan who was talking about the level of preparation of the team and the culture just seems unique, and that's probably a function of Shanahan. And so much of coaching is what we don't see on the field. We dissect the strategy, we dissect the mistake where you take the ball first in overtime. And I think part of what's allowed this team to be successful through all these vicissitudes and players being mad about this or that, it just seems like they know how to prepare and they do a really good job of it. And that has allowed them to overcome having a rest day differential of over 20 in a season. And perhaps that's a lot of the answer for why this stuff has just not mattered as much as it might matter somewhere else.
They seem to maintain what I think often those of us who get to be in locker rooms think is kind of a facade for most teams, but they seem to maintain some semblance of the team mattering. Yeah, like we do care about being 49ers. Like we all know, having been around it, like that's for the fans. A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, right?
I'm proud to be a Jaguar. I'm such a Jaguar.
And I don't mean they're proud of being 49ers because of the history. I just mean they do seem to be able to consistently maintain a sense that the team matters. Doesn't matter more. Like my contract still matters. Like all this other stuff. I'm not taking a pay cut for you or whatever, but they do seem to consistently perform like a group of people that cares about winning together. I watched Tara Vanderveer gave a speech a Q&A at the Stanford GSB, the Graduate School of Business, a couple weeks ago. She's won 27 conference championships, 3 national titles, gold medal. Told a funny story about David Stern. Said, I'm worried about this Olympic team, Tara. She said, what are you worried about? He said, you. And she said, don't be worried about me. I don't know if that sounds like the David Stern that knew, Ethan, but she, if you listen to great coaches talk, they just talk about the team constantly. And you're like, yeah, but what else? And they're like, no, it's just the team. And you're like, yeah, but really what's your secret? And they're like, no, the team. We're like, yeah, but that's everyone talks about the team. Like, give me something good. And they're like, no, it's the team. It's the team. And somehow the Niners feel like they've got some of that, even though we know it's a very individual thing,
Yeah. And well, okay. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about the whole team thing. I'm trying to avoid talking Brock Purdy in the offseason. It just seems like an alcoholic licking booze stains off the floor at this point, because what's really going on are some of these new presences. So we'll end on this. Who are the top 3 guys who have impressed at these 49ers OTAs?
So people, I guess everyone listening at this point is still cares about this, but the people who impressed at OTAs are not
a lot of Mason Pline heads.
Your
right
best
now.
Players. These are voluntary OTAs. Okay. So
a lot of alligators out there.
A lot of
Yeah,
alligators. Your best players are not participating or are, participating at 50% or are whatever.
This does not help with engagement, Guy. If we want to clip this is not helping us.
Brock Purdy, number one.
No, they want some sort of rookie, some sort of
But do
man.
Is that what people do want to talk about Brock Purdy?
Well, they do. Well, they still do. It's still going on.
They've had 2 open practices and I've been to 1. Okay. So who's impressed? That day I was there.
Fine. Throw cold water on it.
I liked Mason Klein.
Purdy. Mason Klein, I'm intrigued by.
He moves well. He moves well.
6'7", former basketball player, mystery man. I'm intrigued.
I'll answer this question this way. I think they drafted and signed rookies that are high floor players. And the day that I got to watch them, they appeared that way. I do think they have had a lack of production from recent draft classes. And I could see this being now, do they end up with a George Kittle or a Fred Warner, a high ceiling guy? I don't know, but I do think it's going to be, I think Ricky Pearsall is going to contribute. I think Jacob Cowing's going to contribute. I think at least one of the 2 running backs they added are going to contribute. I think one of the 2, if not both of the defensive backs they added in the draft are going to contribute. Like, I do think they got contributors. I think the challenge, and this is like a Warriors thing too, this is the lesson for me out of the Trey Lance situation. If you arrive to a team that has a bunch of established players, star players, and championship aspirations, it's actually really challenging to just kind of fit in a little bit. Because when you fit in just a little bit, they're just asking you, just hit a couple of like, you're not going to get 15 shots, but you have to hit the one shot that's open. And that's difficult. And so they've got a group of guys that are, I think they were veteran, quote unquote, college players. And I think we'll be able to contribute in the way that you have to contribute on the Niners, which is you might get 15 targets. Are you going to catch 11 of those balls? I think it's difficult. It's like your Justin Holiday story from the last podcast you did, where he missed a bunch of shots and Andre Iguodala gave him tough love. If you are Ricky Pearsall, who's the Niners' first round pick, you're not getting 40 targets. So you better be in the place you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there for the 3 routes or the 5 routes that you're going to run today. And that's tough. That's a difficult thing to do.
It certainly is. I like Cowing. It just seems like there are a lot of mouths to feed, but he's the guy that I'm very hopeful for. I want to believe in Pearsall. I'm intrigued. I'm very excited for the preseason when it eventually happens. I'm excited for whatever training camp coverage is going to happen, and I can't believe that there's going to be more Brock Purdy debating every week from now till then and from here ever after, where one ranking says he's 2nd and then another ranking says he's 17th. And it's just this incredible Rorschach test that the most outwardly boring man in America continues to present the football media. And I know where I stand, as I'm firmly in the still underrated camp, but time will tell. That's something I've been taught over the years, is that you can be very certain of a perspective and you ultimately just have to eat it, because sometimes you're wrong and it will happen every now and again. But, I know where I stand. I feel like you stand more in between the, Brock amazing and Brock 17th. And I think you've got a lot of respect for Shanahan. That's my perspective on you.
Yep. That's about accurate. I think he has the potential he has to continue to improve. It's doing it over and over and over and over again is the hard part. He also accomplished like the hard part. Having a full great NFL season is the hard part.
Yeah.
But if you're going to be a franchise quarterback, you have to do it over and over and over again.
Yeah. People get so passionately into defending certain players like the story is already written, and the answers to these questions will just be defined by what they do over years. And there's no big prize to achieve. And the only prize you can achieve is by making a prediction and having that prediction come true.
It's the forgotten part. Oh, sorry. I was just say it's the forgotten part of what made the Warriors story wasn't just the championships. It was that at multiple points in the early part of the dynasty, there were decisions.
Yes.
Like David Lee or Klay Thompson, Monte Ellis or Steph Curry. Yeah. One of them has to go. Which one's it going to be? And like all of that set the stage. Mark Jackson or Steve Kerr.
Yeah.
All that stuff set the stage. And I remember those days were before they'd won, it was so exciting.
It was intense.
Because there was urgent decisions to make regularly.
Oh, I wanted them to trade Clay for Kevin Love. That's what all the analytics told me to do. Clay wasn't even that efficient. And it's weird that Jerry West knew more about basketball than I did, but sometimes these things happen. It's unexpected, very strange. It was also Steve. I mean, that's something that Steve doesn't get enough credit for. People go, oh, Steve, what does he do? They complain, and it's Klay Thompson's getting traded if the coach isn't Steve Kerr. That I am firmly convinced of. It is what I've heard from so many people. Steve was brought in, and I feel like in some ways Steve is shy about saying as such for a variety of reasons. There's a little bit of look at me if you're doing that. There's also a little bit of, well, how'd you feel about Kevin Love? Because that's a component in why the position was represented that way. If Steve Kerr was over the moon about Kevin Love, then Clay would have been traded. It wasn't just a matter of, oh my God, I love Clay. It was also a matter of, this guy seems to, there was also that. So that was a very important decision early on. But what I also remember from those days is that people will find it to be unfathomable if you think a player early on is better than what they think he's capable of. But then we will all go through the creeping determinism if he succeeds of going, oh, yeah. Steph Curry, top 10 player of all time. If I had said, hey, I think Steph Curry could become a top 10 player of all time back in 2013, you're the most laughable idiot homer. If you said he could be an MVP candidate back then, that's also what you are. And while I don't know what Purdy is going to become, I feel similarly in such a way where if all I was doing was judging this guy according to the production, then I'm a wild-eyed, crazy person in the media, unless he does it for 2 more seasons, and then that's just the sensible take anybody would have.
That's right.
That's funny. It's funny the way these things go. Guy, anything to plug on the outro?
No.
So humble. The humble Haberman.
Sure. Just Google if you're interested. Google
guy. See how that works.
What am I going to say? Like, oh, here's the link. Whatever.
Yeah.
Subscribe to Guy Haberman's YouTube channel. How about that?
Oh, subscribe to House of Strauss. Subscribe today.
Support
Give me money for
everybody talking on this podcast.
Yeah, let us know. And we'll discover later. We'll discover later if this is the sort of conversation people want or not. I don't know. Well, thanks so much.
This is like the 3rd or 4th time I've been on. You don't know yet?
No.
No, I don't
know.
The
answer is no.
Keep going to
you have to keep coming back and doing it again and putting up big numbers. And then
we're
eventually
still doing market research. We're
still do it without Kyle, all of the above.
You're still hoping.
Yeah, we're still looking.
I like this. Are you sure you guys don't want this?
Yeah, it's like the flea flicker that we can never quite get in the end zone, but we're still seeing about it. No, it's always fantastic. Thanks for being on. I love the conversation. We should golf again and take care. I never stick the landing on these. I never end these well. The podcast is ending. Deal with it, people.
Bang!
Do you believe in Strausses?